Hi, welcome to episode 75 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we've all been living in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Ed Tomlinson, who is a professor at West Virginia University. We connected through the organization Braver Angels, and I'm really excited to have Ed on. Thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Absolutely, Michael. It's a pleasure to join you this evening. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to accept. As you mentioned, I am a professor. I'm a professor of management in the Chambers College of Business and Economics at West Virginia University. And I'm also, as you mentioned, very involved in the Braver Angels organization. I am the uh, Red co-chair for the West Virginia Braver Angels Alliance. I am the state co-coordinator for West Virginia as well. I am a Braver Angels certified card carrying moderator for their various programs, and I'm also on the Braver Angels Scholars Council.
Yeah, so you're heavily involved. How did you get involved with Braver Angels?
Well, it's been several years now, and my recollection is a little bit fuzzy, but somehow or another, I have become aware of the organization, probably because I am a member of Heterodox Academy, which is a group of faculty spanning the ideological spectrum that is concerned about conformity in academia and works to champion viewpoint diversity. And the founder of Heterodox Academy is John Haidt. He's a social psychologist by training, and he is also a business school professor at NYU Stern. And so he was a founder of Braver Angels and is also very involved with Braver Angels. So he's on their board. And so I might have heard about Braver Angels through my association with Heterodox Academy. Several years ago, somehow or another, I had been contacted by Donna Murphy, who is also very involved at Braver Angels, and she was leading an initiative at the time to get more Braver Angels alliances in states that did not currently have one. And so West Virginia was on her list, on her to-do list, and somehow or another, she found me or I found her, and the rest is history. That's how it all started.
And then I guess I'd ask, why did the Braver Angels mission resonate enough for you to want to not only become involved, but to be very actively involved?
Yeah, so there's a professional interest, of course. As I mentioned, I'm a professor of management. My primary area of emphasis is in organizational behavior, although I do teach courses in human resource management as well. And more specifically, my research expertise deals with conflict management and especially trust and trust, how it's established in interpersonal relationships, how it can be repaired once it's been broken, and so forth and so on. And just in seeing what's happening in our society and people losing trust in institutions and losing trust in each other, and the political polarization is something that concerns me. It is a prominent issue in work organizations. People clock in and they don't sort of leave their political views behind them when they clock in necessarily, and so forth and so on. And so there's just a lot of issues in our society right now in workplaces and beyond, where we don't trust each other anymore. We don't know how to work through conflict with each other anymore. All of those things are a professional interest to me as well as a personal interest.
I was in the Navy back in the mid '90s, and my ship was recently decommissioned just like last weekend, and I got together with some of those shipmates, and I was in the wardroom. I was an officer, and one of the things that I was, I guess, to me marveling at, during the reunion was how we all kind of have gone on to do different things. Like somebody lives in
Sure.
Madison, somebody lives in Dubai, somebody lives in Las Vegas, and we all came to that ship from different trajectories, but yet we all kind of overlapped and worked in a very intense atmosphere for just a year or so, or maybe just a few months in some cases. But there was kind of a bond and a trust, and we were out, went out to get some beers afterwards, and there's kind of this camaraderie that I don't think you get in the civilian world at all,
I'd
that
agree
I
with that.
felt.
I'd agree with that. That really resonates with me. My undergraduate work was done at Virginia Military Institute. And while I did
Mm,
not go into active duty after graduation, I have some, I've had some similar experiences. And any type of military organization really excels at sort of establishing that esprit de corps, right?
yeah.
That type of unity where you just build bonds with other people from all different walks of life, and it's nearly indestructible. And the military has figured out how to do something very, very special that we perhaps need to replicate at scale throughout other societal institutions. I
Yeah.
don't think it
And
necessarily means shaving everyone's head and screaming at them for 13 weeks or what have you, but there's something
well,
about going through shared adversity that really builds a very tight bond.
and I think even the shared disagreement, like I think that, my family, my wife and I, like, we have heated discussions sometimes and disagreements, and we can be very angry at each other, but it's kind of like it's almost like the stretching and then coming back is what strengthens the relationship. And I don't necessarily think it's bad that there's disagreement in the country. I think it's bad how we disagree. I think it's bad at, we worry more about like what you think instead of how you think. What you believe instead of how you believe. And I think that's the problem, because I think in some respect you could,
Mhm.
if you were to look at a democracy or look at America and look at all the politicians just getting along, like that just means, like, who knows what's going on there, right? They could all just be like, taking care of each other and, fleecing the voters as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean, if you don't want people getting along, you just want them to disagree in a productive way that's committed to some overarching truth or system. And it feels like now, whether it's the left or the right, if there's something that goes wrong politically, it's like people just start saying, well, the whole system needs to be overturned, we need to get rid of the electoral college, we need to do this or do that. Like, it doesn't. And I think, to me, that's what gets most exhausting, is like we can't just kind of keep going back and forth. When your guy wins, yay, the system's great. When your guy loses, yay, oh, boo, the system sucks. Let's
That's right.
overturn it.
Yeah, so there's a really great book on that topic that I read over the summer by a guy named Francis Fukuyama, and he is a scholar that's written a very prominent book on trust in our literature, research literature, and but more recently he's written a book, and it's a short book, and I don't agree with everything he argues in there, but it's called Liberalism and Its Discontents. And liberalism is not liberals as in on the political spectrum, liberals versus conservatives. Liberalism here is meant more broadly in terms of just sort of the Enlightenment ideals, right? That people have personal property, that there's due process, that there's a legal framework. It's not the law of the jungle. All those types of things, right? That's in that sense of liberalism, and we lose sight of just you throw that word out there, and it raises all these connotations like, oh well, you're on the left, or what. No, this is the system that we all live under. And it's just like kind of Democrats versus Republicans. We live in a democratic republic, right? So but anyway, so he goes on to explain how liberalism has become not only misunderstood, but how how parties how certain parties on both the left and the right have become disgruntled. And it's exactly what you just described. Whether it's you're on the left or the right, it's sort of a fair weather assessment of liberalism, right? To the extent that it's even properly understood, it's like, well, I'm not getting my way right now, and so, because this is not working out and I'm not getting everything that I want in a pluralistic society, then I'm going to rage against this. And we see this from people who are on both sides of the aisle. And it
Mm-hmm.
is very disconcerting. But liberalism is what allows, classic liberalism, mind you, is what
Mm-hmm.
allows us to be able to live together in peace. We can't jettison it. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We can't throw a temper tantrum every time something doesn't go our way, and make every little dispute something that we're going to resort to a mushroom cloud over. That's not
Yeah.
constructive.
Yeah. Well, and maybe this touches upon your profession too, but is it possible that I mean, I like to say, like, when people get frustrated with the government, again, across the spectrum, right? Have you ever done something at work that went smoothly? We all work in small little organizations that are not nearly the size of the United States of America, right? And it can take forever to get a PowerPoint slide approved by the right people for a presentation. It takes forever to merge together two companies, or to spin off a company. It can take a while for somebody to come in and become the new vice president of some small section of a big company. So when you're looking at the United States of America and you're thinking about how hard it is, or you get frustrated because there are problems, you get frustrated because things don't happen the way you want, you get frustrated because you disagree. It's almost it is so, I don't know, and not even like say like entitled. It's amazing that any of us would really get frustrated and not be more patient. And to go even further, I mean, you're now talking about a 330 million person nation that's spread
Right.
across three time zones. That's one of the largest in the world. That's one of those populous in the world, that has all these different terrains. We've got tropical, we got subtropical, we got tundra, we have everything.
Right.
So of course we're going to disagree. Of course things aren't going to happen exactly the way we want. And I think it's like a constant state of like evolution and frustration. And then you throw in technology, where all of a sudden we used to all live in our own little bubbles where you were interacting with a few hundred people that were just like you. And now all of a sudden you're hearing every freaking viewpoint in the country, if not the world. And some of them are even real. So I
Sure.
think we should all like cut ourselves some slack and be like, yeah, this is a rough time. We're gonna have to get through this. I don't think it's the end of the world. I just think this is the challenge for our generation.
I agree. Yeah, and
So
as the tagline for Heterodox Academy states, "Great minds don't all think alike," and so we have to recognize that too. There is, we live in a pluralistic society. Different people are going to have different points of view. The highest priority of some people is not the highest priority of others, and we need to rediscover how to agree to disagree, and to engage in civil discourse, and to work through our problems constructively, not destructively.
yeah, I mean, have you seen, a change one way or the other, and either in your work with Bravery Angels or in your hometown of West Virginia, like one way or the other, in the last few years, say since 2016?
I think there are some optimistic things that are happening. There are a lot of organizations, and Braver Angels is only one, but there are many organizations that are working in this depolarization space, where depolarization is referring to the dislike and the distrust we have of other people who think differently than we do. So obviously we should have ideological polarization, in the sense that different people are going to have different worldviews, different ways of looking at the world, different ways of thinking about the world, different ways of interacting with the world, different preferences, different values, structures, and so forth and so on. We should expect that. We should be ready to encounter that and to cope with that. What we should not be so quick to do is to label anyone who disagrees with us or votes for the other guy, so to speak, to vilify them, to demonize them, to engage in sort of dehumanizing behaviors and things like that. That's not constructive. That's what researchers call affective polarization. That's not healthy. That's really toxic stuff.
Mm,
And so there are a lot of organizations. Braver Angels is only one, but many organizations that are working in that space and doing some really great things. And so, just to kind of give you a sense of another organization that I work with, uh, well, actually, another two organizations that I work with that are relevant to what I do professionally. So, in all of my courses that I teach at WVU, I require students to go through the perspectives lessons uh, that John Haidt originally had a hand in, and now they're administered by Constructive Dialogue Institute. And it basically teaches the skills of civil discourse in political disputes. So I require that for all of my courses. Their programs are the learning modules are online. So, students create a username and password, and they go through these lessons on their own time. and they learn why it is that we get so upset with people who see things differently than us politically, right? And they
Mhm.
learn all about, the social psychology behind all of this, and they learn constructive ways of having these conversations in a civil way so they can learn. And then the other organization that is relevant for a course I'm teaching this fall on conflict management is uh, so this is Unify America, and they have their annual college bowl. So the Unify America College Bowl. And so after my students have gone through the Constructive Dialogue Institute's perspective lessons, then they participate in the College Bowl. And so what that involves is they are signing up for a 1 hour conversation with another college student somewhere else, okay, that is different from them politically. So when they sign up, they indicate their political leanings, and then they're matched with someone on sort of the other side of the spectrum, if you will, for a 1 hour conversation, structured conversation. And this isn't like a Twitter or an X or a conversation that typically turns into a big dumpster fire, right? Or a
Yeah.
Facebook argument or something like that. There's some guardrails there, but it's kind of a structured conversation, but it's not moderated. It's just a one-on-one conversation between people who do not see eye to eye politically, and what they discover almost um, almost without fail, almost completely consistently, is that there are some things that they do agree on, and they enter this conversation with a great deal of anxiety and trepidation, and they leave with a great sense of um, hope, reassurance, right? That this isn't as bad as some of the pundits and some of the media personalities and whatever would have us think it is. It's more optimistic. There's reason to be more optimistic than that.
Yeah.
And that is such an encouragement to them and to me too. So
But,
these are some of the things I see happening. I don't think it's happening enough. I think we need to keep working. I think we still have our work cut out for us. There are entrenched parties on both sides who have vested interest. The conflict in our nation has is something that they have capitalized on as a source of their power. And if the conflict is tamped down to a more reasonable level, uh, or is largely resolved, that takes away their source of power. I think we can readily identify people on both sides of the spectrum who, they have a vested interest in not only maintaining the current levels of conflict, but continuing to stoke them. Amanda Ripley is a journalist who's written a book on conflict, and she refers to these people as conflict entrepreneurs. Like that's their business
yeah.
model, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they don't want this to go away. They don't want this problem to be solved. They have too much to gain by keeping it going. So we need to continue working to expand the footprint of these depolarization initiatives so that we can rediscover our shared humanity. We have a lot more in common than what divides us, and we need to rediscover that.
Yeah.
Not to
You.
in any way minimize the differences that we have, because there are some big differences. I'm not sweeping that under the rug. I'm not uh, denying that, but I think too often it's a temptation for us to just inexorably get sort of drawn into the conflict and only focus on what
Yeah.
divides us and overlook many areas of shared values and overlapping concerns and things like this.
Yeah. No, that's true. And you know, I feel like the anytime I've reached out, and this is something for me that I've really only been trying to do since like 2020 or 2020 as the world started opening up for us here in New York, but is like reaching out and finding out that there's I think that there's understandable difference. Like to me, like to go back to like the domestic model. Like my wife and I are pledged our lives to each other, and we have plenty of things we disagree with. So how could I look at somebody who's in West Virginia or Montana or Texas and think that their framework of perceiving the world? And I think another braver angel. I think it was Monica Guzman in her book. I think it was her where she talked about how a lot of times it's not that somebody doesn't think something is important. It's just that the way they prioritize things is going to be a little bit different. And I
That's right.
think that there's that, and at least for me, I think that the way the politics runs, and I think this is where it's the people's fault. It's our responsibility. Is that I think that we all eat up politicians. Like we want politicians who will provide us easy solutions that leave us blameless and leave us burdenless. So it's like there's gun problems. Well, we have to get rid of the guns, and we're not going to bother you. We're not going to say that there's anything wrong in your cities or in your communities that's stoking the violence. It's not your fault. We're not going to make you do anything. We're going to make other people sacrifice without you doing sacrifice. And that's all people want. We all, I think, are voting for politicians that give us the easy solutions, that don't make us feel like we're responsible and make us actually sacrifice. You can say, well, I'm going to sacrifice too, but you're already doing something that's within your comfort zone. If you're saying, hey, let's get rid of this, or let's mandate composting, and you say, well, I'm sacrificing too, but that's not, but you're doing what you already want to do. You're making other people do something that they don't want to do. So if you really are worried about the environment, it's not enough to make other people do what you're doing. It's how about more? How about adding a $500 tax to airplane flights that go overseas because they're better for the environment? I bet you'd see a lot of liberals all of a sudden say, no, 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 I don't want to have a tax on my flight to Italy. You know, and I'm sure it goes both ways, but I think that to me is part of it, where I think we all as people, in some respect, I've turned off the news in the last year and a half because I feel like I've got to learn about my fellow Americans and then start electing politicians that reflect, I think, hopefully my more, I think, reasoned worldview of this country, which is I think there's a lot of good people out there, and we're getting a very distorted depiction of the stuff that's out there on the news.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
So can you? So I've never. I was proud to say that I drove through a corner of West Virginia over the summer, but I've never been to West Virginia. So, are you a native of West Virginia?
No, I am from regular Virginia.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm from Lynchburg, Virginia, right in the middle, so central
Hmm.
Virginia. And my wife is from Northeast Ohio. And we met when I was a PhD student at The Ohio State University in Columbus. And then after we got married, we lived up in the outside of the Cleveland area for 7 years. And then we came here. So my family is from Virginia, and her family is from Ohio, and we wound up in the middle, so to
Okay.
speak. Yeah. So this is our 13th year here,
Hmm.
and so neither of us are native to West Virginia, but we've really enjoyed living here. It's a wonderful, wonderful place.
And what did you, I guess, expect? I mean, you grew up nearby, so maybe you already had kind of informed expectations. But what did you expect, and what have you, I guess, discovered that maybe it
Mhm.
was different?
Yeah, I didn't really know what to expect because, like you, the only time that I had spent any time in West Virginia was driving from Virginia to Ohio and back,
Hmm.
right? And so it was all interstate, stop at a gas station, whatever. And I didn't really, I'd never really had spent much time in West Virginia. My wife's different, so in her family, they had a tradition for years and years and years where they would every year they would have a family reunion at Babcock State Park. And I don't know if you've ever seen that sort of quintessential picture of West Virginia. There's a picture of an old mill and a creek running past. It's a classic picture. So that mill is at Babcock State Park, and so every year they would go and they would have a family reunion there. They would do camp. They'd rent some cabins and all of this kind of thing. And so she had regular exposure to bona fide West Virginia. And but I had never really spent any significant amount of time here, and we didn't really know what to expect. Me especially. And but we've really enjoyed it. It's beautiful, beautiful, wonderful people. Um, just a wonderful place.
Yeah. What would you say is your ideal off day? What do
My
you do?
ideal off day, yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't had an ideal one in a while. So I'll qualify it that way, I guess. But uh, but I really love shooting,
Mhm.
and and so uh, and so there are a lot of places here to go do that. There are indoor gun ranges. There are outdoor gun ranges that are even sponsored by the state. They are fantastic facilities. They have covered pavilions at the firing line with these really nice um, uh, shooting benches so you can sit down if you want to do long range. And they've got berms at different distances for backstops, and just fantastic, and then there are other places you can go to do, shotgun, whatever you're into. And but I'm into target shooting, and I really enjoy that, and that's kind of how I unwind and relax. And sometimes the kids come with me, and they, you know, so it's we kind of make a family event. So
Mhm. Did you
yeah.
pick up the shooting at VMI, or is that something you had been
Well,
done
so in high
before?
school, when I was in high school, I went to a public high school that had a junior ROTC program, and so I had gotten into small bore rifle shooting. I was on the rifle team. I became the captain of our high school rifle team. I went on to VMI. I was in small bore rifle, NCAA small bore rifle, all 4 years there. But of course, I'm from Virginia, and you know, uh, a lot of people in my family would go shoot recreationally and so forth and so on. I have relatives who are really into hunting. Uh, um, just being truthful here, I've never been hunting. I don't have anything against hunting. I've just never been. I do target shooting,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that's my thing. But then after I graduated from college, small bore shooting is such a niche sport, and you need a certain type of rifle and certain types of equipment and certain type of environment to do all of that. And I didn't have any of that anymore, and it was very expensive to and just not practical anymore. So that's when I started really getting back into other types of shooting that are more um, user friendly, I guess. Don't require as much in the way of specialized equipment and
Mhm.
specialized environment and that kind of thing.
Mhm. How much of and I don't know much about this, but I try to analogize to something that I like observe or kind of perceive. But like, how much of the, I guess the like firearms fandom or what whatever, is, I guess, just kind of like I think like if you like there are guys that get into like cars, right, and like they go down the
Mm-hmm.
rabbit hole of cars
Oh,
and
sure.
they
Oh, yeah.
tinker with things, and there are guys who collect wine and they kind of go down the rabbit hole of like I have to have
Mhm.
this, I got to get that, and they get obsessed with it. um is it kind of like a similar thing, like once like if you go in, then you can just go down the rabbit hole and you've got one type of firearm and then you've got to have the next type of firearm, and then you hear about some like you start tinkering and like how much of it is that versus
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
you
I
can do
mean,
that with anything. You're right. You're
yeah.
right. You can do it with wine. You can do it with yes. You're right. And it is possible to do that with firearms as well. I am not a collector, um, so I don't do that. I'm as I mentioned, I'm mostly into target shooting. That's my thing.
Mm,
And so um, handguns, rifles, those sorts of things. Yeah, I have
mm,
those. I don't feel like I need personally the latest greatest thing that comes off the line every time they come out with some new gizmo or whatever. But um, I do go to gun shows. I do get the magazines. I do watch the videos when they come out and so forth and so on. And so I try to kind of keep up with what's going on, but I don't have the financial resources or the spare time or all of that to go completely whole hog on it. But
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, I know people who are probably guilty of that. So
Yeah, there's not many shooting ranges in New York City. I
maybe
don't know
not
if
in
there
your
are
part of
any.
New York, but I would imagine you have some in more rural parts of your state and so
Oh
forth.
yeah, yeah, no, but
Yeah,
but not in New York City. I think there might have been
sure,
one,
yeah.
but yeah, no, there's. I mean, I I, I think the the firearms discussion is way beyond the scope of like what I could talk about like in an informed
Oh yeah.
basis. But I think that in a more general sense, I think this why it goes back to the idea of just talking with people, because I kind of feel like when you just understand people's contexts, you can understand that the same thing can be perceived in different ways.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Yeah.
and
Hmm.
has different, it's
Absolutely.
got different associations, like
Hmm.
somebody who has gone hunting with their father and grandfather for a Thanksgiving dinner or something, for their entire life.
Yeah.
The firearms have a completely different association than a New Yorker, none of who have guns, who the only time they ever hear about a gun is when there's some kind of street violence. So
Yeah.
um I think, like, to me, what gets tiresome in all these debates is that there seems to be more of like almost like an imposition of you have to see things my way versus kind of be like, let me see things your way.
I agree. I agree.
And I think that to me would be the most helpful thing. And that's like for me, what I've found myself centering on is what I call like four like core values, which is like just trying to be curious, respectful, compassionate, and humble
Hmm.
in interactions. And I think maybe it goes to like organizationally, because what I've found is the more I become aware of that, I think it's easier in the working world. Like if you think about it, like a lot of the stuff about learning to be a good citizen really is just about learning how to coexist in a community. And you have communities, in your neighborhood, you have communities at your church, you have communities on your team, you've got communities, every time you're with a different group of people, there's a community. When you're working, you're in a community of people. And if you can kind of try to see things from somebody else's perspective, it might change how you manage them. It might change how you lead them. And I
Hmm.
think even what I see in the working world is that there's just a lot of people who've got their blinders on and are just buried and are, I don't know, they either just kind of doing things rote, or they're doing things defensively, or they're doing things without trust.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a big, big piece of it. I'm convinced. And
Yeah.
trust is a social glue. I mean, that's what binds people together.
And
And
I bring this up. My
yeah.
wife works at a big investment bank, and she does marketing for them. But like she was talking about how like trying to get something through, again, a PowerPoint slide or something, requires so many people to have a viewpoint in it. And I think part of it is kind of like people are like defensive, or they're not trusting, or they don't know the people to trust them. I don't know what it is, but there is some kind of like there's some lack of cohesion, some lack of cohesive glue in
Hmm.
all these different communities.
Yeah.
So, have you ever been up to New York?
I have. In fact, my first trip to New York was was to the United States Military Academy, West Point, and
Ah,
I was in rifle matches
uh
at West Point.
huh. Okay.
So, and we also went to Annapolis, of course. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was in high school, I went to a national rifle match at the Air Force Academy. That was fun. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but yeah, I haven't been to New York very many times, but
Mm-hmm.
but interestingly enough, the few times that I have been to New York, it was to shoot.
But you were up. You
Who'd
were
have
up
thunk it?
by West Point, though.
It was at West Point, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then
That's beautiful up there.
and then much more recently, several years ago, I was in New York City, my only time to New York City.
Hmm.
Um, I was there to um, present some research at a fraud conference.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
how
that
did
was my only
you?
time. That was my only time in New York City.
Okay. And what was your perceptions of New York City?
Oh, I enjoyed it. I My wife and I are not big city people, so Morgantown, West Virginia, for us is fantastic. You know, it has a normal standing population of about 30,000 people. When school is in, it adds just shy of another 30,000 people. Um, that probably sounds rural to you, but we love it. You know, we love that as a, day in and day out kind of thing. When I worked outside of Cleveland, we did not live in Cleveland. Well, we lived sort of just outside of Cleveland the very first year, but then we had a house built for us, and we were about 35 minutes or so out of Cleveland. So that's the kind of commute I had back and forth uh, to get back and forth to work at that point in time. And we lived in a little town called Streetsboro, gateway to progress, 12,000
Hmm.
people. And
Hmm.
so we prefer to live our lives on a day in and day out basis, kind of out of the way. We don't want to be totally in the sticks. We want to be close
Hmm.
to like Walmart or whatever, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But we don't want to be in the thick of it, you know.
Hmm.
And New York City is a fine place for us to visit.
Hmm.
I don't think I would enjoy living there just because it's the city that never sleeps. It's
Yeah.
too much
Yeah.
for me.
Hmm.
And I prefer sort of a more sparse environment, right? And we still have some of the same. I'm biting my tongue because I know that's not exactly right, but we still have some similar frustrations. There are traffic jams in Morgantown. The
Hmm.
streets were not meant to accommodate 60,000 people, all right?
Hmm.
And so,
Hmm.
there are times, where you still have to wait in traffic, but it's nothing like what you're enduring.
Right.
And so it just, yeah. So, and people sort themselves, right? I mean, people
Hmm.
go gravitate to sort of environments that maybe sort of are more, appealing to them. So that
Yeah.
happens at some level.
Yeah.
I think. And so I thought it was wonderful to visit. We went to a Broadway show.
What'd you
Uh,
say?
it, we saw the play Where Everything Goes Wrong. That might not be
Oh, I'm not
exactly the
familiar.
title, but you know what I'm talking about?
No, no, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, it was hilarious. It's something like that might be the exact title, the play Where Everything Goes Wrong. And yeah, look it up. It was fantastic.
Okay.
We loved it.
Yeah.
It was great. Um, yeah. So I wasn't there for very long,
Hmm.
only a day or so. But we were there long enough to catch a show. And
Okay.
that was really
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
I grew up out in the suburbs of in Long Island, and I never really came into the city. And then after college, I think at the end of college, when I started like coming, and my wife got a job here and got to learn it. But I think like I know for me, what attracts me to New York is that I think that I'm actually kind of an introvert, and I think
Mm,
having so many people around me kind of forces me to get out of my comfort zone, but in some respect, get into my comfort zone
mm,
because I know that I feel happier being engaged with people, but my
sure.
inclination is to not. So
Guilty, Your
there.
Honor. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
So I think, and I think like the other thing is that I mean it definitely it gets crazy, but I think that's why like when people think like New Yorkers like kind of turn off or ignore each other, it's almost like they're kind of reacting the way you react. Like we all kind of might feel the same thing. If you actually paid attention to it all, then you'd go crazy. So either if you don't live here, you can just kind of come in and leave after a day. But if you're a native New Yorker and you're dealing with this craziness all the time, you just have to kind of turn yourself off to it as a matter of survival. It doesn't mean you don't care, but it's just there's too many stimuli. So sometimes it's probably to your detriment, but I think in general, if people seem turned off, it's more just yeah, it's a there's a lot coming at you, and you just can't react to everything, otherwise you'd go crazy.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, and I guess that's, I guess so sometimes when I'm talking on the podcast, I feel like it's, I guess not trying to. I think it's good to think that you love where you live, but I think it's also good to realize that not everybody would love where you live, and that's okay. Like they don't have to love it, but it's good to know why you love it, and good to know why others might not love it.
I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, that makes good
So
sense.
yeah. So if you could live in another part of the country, do you have any other places you'd go?
Well, so Beth's parents now live in Florida. They decided that they had had enough of the crazy winters in Northeast Ohio, and so they pulled the plug years ago and moved down to Florida. That's where they live now, and uh, so we occasionally visit them,
Mm,
and they've got a pretty plush gig down there. So that's tempting sometimes to maybe
mm,
get a little closer to them. And my family is still in Central Virginia,
okay.
so those are places that are near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. um one of the things that I think people, when they think about the country and like the ideology, is there seems to be like, the coasts think one way and the internal part of the country, I mean, not in all respect, but think differently. And
Hmm.
like I read a book about Lewis and Clark, and um it kind of, when you read about when I read about their journey and was reminded of how much they depended on the rivers, it made
Yeah.
me think about how, one of the things that's different being on the coast versus being inside the country in the interior is that in the interior, it's all those rivers that kind of, maybe not now so much, but historically for a long time, what united the country was those rivers.
Hmm.
So I wonder if that's also one thing that kind of like it's historically relevant to understanding, like there's cultural similarity in a vast swath of the middle of the country because they were connected by those rivers in a way that they wouldn't have been connected to the coasts.
Yeah,
Does that
geography can
make any
bring people
sense?
together. Yeah, geographic features can bring people together, and you need water, and
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's where population centers form, close to rivers.
Yeah.
Is the source of water, and water is a mode of transportation, and yeah, I mean, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And we need ways of bringing people back into proximity with each other. Back in 1954, there's a guy named Gordon Allport who uh, basically published a book, and he lays out his contact hypothesis. And the main nut that he was trying to crack at the time was dealing uh, with uh, racial discrimination and prejudice. And what he proposed in his book is, we've got these ways of being in our country where people kind of form into their own distinct groups. The people who are like me are in my in group, and anyone who's not in my in group is part of my out group, right? Um, and the people in the other group are thinking the same thing, right? And they separate from each other. They kind of go off and they do their own things, right? Um, and and they don't get along with each other when they do come into contact. And paradoxically, what Allport says is, now what you got to do is you've got to put them in contact with each other, um, and sustain that contact. Because what happens is when you get into this us versus them thinking, right? Very prone to stereotyping, labeling the other side, right? Um, Usually in a negative way, right? And and that prejudice then manifests itself in discrimination, right? Because they're the enemy, they're the villain. Something bad about them. We're good, they're bad. And and both groups will treat each other this way. And so what he's saying is you got to break down those silos so that people will get individuated information, so that people will correct their negative stereotypes, so that people will see that, you know, will see the areas of shared humanity. So people will see that there is middle ground. So people will see that these distinct groups uh, do have middle ground, do have things that they agree on, and so he says this contact, especially under certain conditions, is actually the antidote, right? Conditions where the groups come together under equal status, the groups have a common and superordinate goal, the groups have important forms of material support to enable them to coexist in peace, these sorts of things. And over the years, a lot of social science research has basically tested the contact hypothesis in various settings, right, to deal with racial harmony, which is the context in which it sort of originally um, was kind of developed, right? I guess, but in all these other different areas as well. And meta-analytic studies have shown that the contact hypothesis really stood the test of time. Uh, and so again, that kind of takes me back to what I was saying earlier about Braver Angels and a lot of these other organizations that are kind of working in a similar space where we're trying to bring people together who are different, who do have different views, reds and blues, as we say in Braver Angels, but liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, et cetera, right? To bring people together to understand where there are areas of agreement where we have more in common than we might otherwise be led to believe, that there are important differences, and we don't seek to sweep those under the rug or to minimize those, but we shouldn't maximize those either, right? We need a more accurate view of the conflict, and the only way to get a more accurate view of the conflict is in proximity to the people we disagree with. We've got to somehow hold it together, right? We got
Yeah.
to and so disagreement's not bad necessarily, but it should be accurate disagreement, not exaggerated disagreement, not disagreement grounded in hyperbole and and you know
Yeah. No,
excessive rhetoric ratcheted up to 11 all the
right.
time. Right? So
And I mean, an idea of like harmony is also about, I think the country has definitely a different place than it was a generation or two ago as far as like maybe like the races goes, but I think that the new thing for our generation is like it's the politics, right? Like if you wore a Donald Trump hat in the middle of New York, in certain parts of New York City, those parts that would be welcoming to many other types of people and many other circumstances might not necessarily welcome you.
mhm.
um so and I think that in many respects, people will at least say that they're not prejudiced or trying not to be. But the second you bring up politics, they revert to it, left or right. Like, oh, you're from New York or you're from West
Right.
Virginia,
And
and
this
and
is
that's
the
okay.
in-group out-group. This is a
Yeah,
basic,
yeah,
yeah, this is basic intergroup relations 101. In-groups, out-groups. And it doesn't just happen around race or
yeah,
gender, or it can happen around politics,
yeah,
and it absolutely does.
yeah. And the way I see the way I guess the politicians, and I noticed this like in my text messages that I was getting from all these like Democratic candidates, because we give them money at some point, and obviously our number got circulated around, but like all those messages are all based in fear.
Oh,
And
sure.
I don't know that it's any different on the right, but I
Hmm.
can say on the left, like more than half of them, it's just like they're going to come get you. The MAGA Republicans, the radical MAGA Republicans, the extreme, like it's just doom and gloom. And I've
Hmm.
taken
Yeah.
to responding to
Joe
every one
Biden
of
is
those
coming
text
for your
messages.
guns.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
yeah,
right.
and I
Yeah. I
just
mean, yeah, I can rattle off a bunch of them too. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Sure.
and I
And
say
they raise money on this. Yeah.
yeah,
They raise
and
money on
I've
this.
taken to telling them that I think that they're wrong. Please take me off your email list, and I think you're being lazy because it's lazy marketing, and you're being irresponsible, if not dangerous. And I say take me off your list because I think that's the worst thing. And I don't know if that's a bunch of consultants that are just saying, hey, just mention, Biden and guns, or mention Donald Trump and MAGA, and you're going to get results. But I think that goes back to, like, all of us need to start taking some responsibility to, like, be aware to not fall for those. But also, like, who are these politicians that are letting their consultants just let them do that? Is it really just about you getting enough money to win an election? Like, is that all that matters? And if it does to them, that I don't want to vote for them, and I don't want them in office, left or right.
One of the things that Braver Angels is doing now, and not to keep coming back to that, but since I am involved with the organization, and I have, and you are as well, but this really kind of touches on this very issue. About a year or so ago, Braver Angels launched a new initiative called Braver Politics, where they are taking some of their programming, the classic Red Blue workshop and things like this, and tweaking it, and actually conducting these programs with elected officials. They're doing it a lot in New Hampshire. They had a training in the New Hampshire state legislature. Um, there are people in Congress who are participating. Them and their staffs are going through Braver Angels training together. And it's just remarkable. We're trying to do something like that here in West Virginia. We haven't
Mm.
quite gotten enough traction just yet, but we are optimistic because West Virginians have this sort of quintessential reputation of, through the years of being able to, um, sort of uh, had this reputation of hospitality and, um, sort of southern manners and civility and things like this. And so I think there's a legacy here. I think there's something here that uh, you know would um, would make this fertile ground for that kind of programming. So
Yeah.
I hope we'll be able to pull it off.
Yeah. Well, to refer to, you were mentioning some of the other groups, and this is on my mind because I was emailing with somebody about it. But um, it was an earlier podcast that I was talking to a friend in the wine business, and I was asking him, like, when he has, different wine distributors like coming saying, "Hey, you should buy this, you should buy that," and I was like, "How can you tell the difference between a trend and a transformation in the market?" And he
Hmm.
said, like, a transformation, a trend is when you just start seeing, like, the same kind of thing, like a rosé is the new thing, and people just start all making the same kind of rosé just to exploit the market and get money. He said the transformation is where you start seeing people doing their own thing. You start seeing a diversity in the movement, and I think that what gives me a lot of, I think, hope and belief, and I think the long term viability and impact of I call it the bridging movement, but all these efforts, is that I think there's so many different people in so many different areas doing so many different things to try to build those bridges, that it makes me feel like, this is something that's really, it's like it is truly a grassroots movement. There's no singular person who's, like, leading this. It's a bunch of people saying, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I want to offer my solution. And I think
Hmm.
that's the beauty of America, is that it is our country to control, and it takes time, but we're the ones who are ultimately accountable. And not everybody can do it, but it seems like there are more and more people that are stepping up and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's such an encouragement.
Yeah. So for me, if I were to come to West Virginia, what would you suggest to somebody, a New Yorker coming to West Virginia, to either, you're a part of it or elsewhere, to have them get a feel for your beloved state?
There are so many things I could say, but the one that I'll go with, since you probably don't have enough time for me to go through my list exhaustively, is I would do a waterfall tour. I would do a
Hmm.
waterfall tour. That's one of the first
Really?
things we did when we moved to North Central West Virginia. There are a lot of really cool waterfalls. That so we obviously we have a lot of wonderful nature venues here, and so places to go hiking and all of this. So and really kind of pretty close to us. There are just a bunch of them going in various directions. Um, you know, these hiking trails that have these magnificent waterfalls. And so that was one of the first things we did when we moved here. We would just go
Mm-hmm.
around and go hiking and
Mm-hmm.
check out these waterfalls and take pictures of them. And
Mm-hmm.
in some cases, let the kids go run and play at a safe distance. So, yeah. So, yeah, just the natural beauty of this place is just amazing. So much
Really.
to be thankful for.
And I have a good friend who I guess said he went skiing. He went skiing there, so there are significant mountains to have skiing
Hmm.
as well in the
Absolutely.
winter.
Yeah, I'm not a skier, but
Neither am
yes,
I.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We have
Yeah.
that, and that makes good sense in the winter months.
Uh huh.
If you're into that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah,
would you say that in your area, is there a certain common link with like people in like Western Pennsylvania, Southeastern Ohio, Kentucky? Like, is the state borders kind of an artificial thing, or I don't know if I'm asking the right question?
yeah. So that would be a good question for my two older boys
Mm-hmm.
because in eighth grade here you have to take West Virginia history,
Ah.
and so they go all through it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cool things about it actually is that that our kids after eighth grade year or during eighth grade year they take a West Virginia trip and they go
Uh-huh.
all over the state. They go down to Charleston, which is our state capital.
Mm-hmm.
There's a right across from the Capitol complex. There's the West Virginia State Museum, which is amazing. Um, there are other places they go throughout the state. Seneca Rock, Scooper's Rock, which is here in Morgantown or just outside of Morgantown. Just go all over, and they go to an old coal mining town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Loads of fun checking this stuff
Yeah.
out. So, uh, why was I telling you that? You had asked. What did you ask?
I was asking if like if there is a commonality between people
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
across the
yeah. You.
borders.
So, how did the borders originate? I don't know,
Uh-huh.
but here in Morgantown, we're in the north central part of the state. We're not in the upper Panhandle part, but
Mm-hmm.
we're minutes away from Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
and we are minutes away from Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of
Oh,
like
okay. Oh
it's
yeah,
this
yeah,
kind of where we live is kind of like a tri-state area,
yeah,
if you will, right?
yeah.
Uh, and so um, we're a little bit farther from the Ohio border
Mm-hmm.
and from the Virginia border where we live.
Okay. So
Yeah.
like you're near like just a few hour drive from like Penn State.
So um, we're about an hour south of Pittsburgh,
Oh, okay. All right.
hour
So
and a
it's
half south of Pittsburgh.
okay. All right. Still towards the western
Pittsburgh is
part of the
actually
state.
our closest major airport.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So,
Well, we're starting to approach the hour mark here, so I should probably wrap up. But can I ask, like, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
what gives me hope? Well, I do see a lot of good organizations doing a lot of really great things in the depolarization and bridge building space. Um, I hope we are on the right trajectory with those initiatives. Um, and, time will tell. We'll just have to see. Ultimately, on a personal basis, I'm an evangelical Christian, and I believe that God is good and God is sovereign. And my ultimate hope isn't in this world, it lies beyond. But I think that there are some wonderful blessings that we are fortunate to enjoy in this country. And we have amazing freedoms, we have amazing opportunities. People from all around the world are, to this day, sacrificing so much just to try to come here. And So what a blessing we have to live here and to be able to enjoy the freedoms and the structures and the opportunities that are at our fingertips here. But we face some real challenges. And I think that we're starting to see critical mass in terms of people, in terms of organizing efforts, in terms of programming. I think the body of social science research is strong enough to point us into some productive directions. I think there's so many things that are going for us right now, that are in our favor, and we just need to find a way to work together to capitalize on those opportunities, leverage those opportunities um, to really take advantage of this pluralistic society that we have.
Yeah, perfectly said. All right, Ed. Well, thank you so very much for responding to my email and rescheduling a few times and making time this evening. It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Michael, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Take care. Thank you so much.